I feel like I've been very busy, but I don't know if I actually have been. Like, I've been watching a lot of weird movies. Not as many as I normally do. I got to see the new Godzilla, and that was fucking
I saw
dope.
you were excited about that on the social medias.
We went to the Budget Theater in Milwaukee, and they're still showing it. It's like, I can see the new Godzilla for $3? Hell yeah. Because we had went to go see... we went to the theater, and I had wanted to see Midsummer, but it wasn't playing. There was only one theater it was playing at. And then I don't remember the other movie. It was a Friday night. Every movie was sold out. So I was like, okay, we can either go drive about 20 extra minutes towards Delafield and go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Or we could go 20 minutes the other direction, go to the Budget Theater and see Godzilla. And I was like, well, Godzilla's on its way out, and I feel like this is a movie I need to see on a big screen. So I was like, I'm going to go see Godzilla.
Nice.
And it was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I was riding a Godzilla high for a very long time after that movie. Ow.
Cool. But on another note, I hope I can remember any of this movie.
Oh my God! Let me start the intro because I do have a fun. I think it's kind of funny, a story with this movie. And I was kind of hoping you were going to lead this episode. Okay, but, we will get through it
together.
Anyone out there who is a fan of the Dark Crystal, this is not us saying that we didn't necessarily like the Dark Crystal, but we will talk about that in a second.
Warning! This movie podcast actually discusses movies. Be aware that it may discuss any of the following elements: endings, surprise twists, unexpected cameos, and all manner of spoilers. If this doesn't appeal to you, why listen to a movie podcast? Without further ado, please enjoy our feature presentation, The Shameless Picture Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Shameless Picture Show. I am Michael Viers, and with me, as always, is a man that looks like a gelfling and smells like a gelfling.
Nick Richards.
There you go. Oh, this movie was hard to find a quote for, but that one seemed to be perfect.
I just wasn't sure where the jump-in point was going to be.
Yeah, I guess you
could have cut it earlier, could have went longer with it.
I guess you can't see my script, so you can't see where I put the ellipses. Fun fact about my script.
Hold for applause.
I still write hello and welcome, just in case I forget it.
Goodbye and get out of here. Oh, wait a minute. Nope. That's
so like I even write your part where it says Nick Richards.
Do you do like carriage return center Nick?
No,
Nick
I don't go that far into it. I just write your name all in caps.
Film strip formatting.
Yeah. But on today's episode, we'll be discussing a polarizing film, yet highly influential film. Jim Henson and Frank Oz's Frank Oz? Would it just be Oz?
Ozai. I think it's like cul-de-sac where it's Frank's Oz. That's
Jim Henson and Frank Oz dark fantasy epic, The Dark Crystal. Thousands of years ago, a magical crystal, the Dark Crystal, is cracked and two new races spawn, the evil Skeksis and the Mystics. The Skeksis destroy all around them and drink the life force of other crystals by using the Dark Crystal to replenish themselves, and the Mystics know this, and they know this needs to end, and the crystal must be repaired. Jen, a young creature called a Gelfling, was raised by the Mystics. His entire race was killed by the evil Skeksis, and it's said that only a Gelfling can stop the evil. That's a lot to live up to. So Jen goes on his journey to repair the crystal, meets another Gelfling along the way, and learns the history of his people. Henson and Oz, best known for the wildly popular Muppets, want to do something more ambitious with their puppeteering skills. Inspired by the dark folklore of the Grimm fairy tales, they wanted to make something dark and scary for kids, feeling it was unhealthy for children to never be afraid. They set out to make one of the most technically complex films of its age, which features no real people, only puppets, animatronics, and elaborate costuming and stages. No one had seen anything like The Dark Crystal before. The Dark Crystal was mildly successful during its original theatrical run. While it's considered one of the most successful puppet films of all time, it struggled to turn a profit. Parents were concerned the film was too dark for children, and it also was released in the shadow of Steven Spielberg's E.T. And while the film was critically mixed, it won quite a few awards and was nominated for AFI's list of top 10 fantasy films of all time. Directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz, from a script by David Odell, from a story from Jim Henson, the film stars Stephen Garlick, Lisa Maxwell, Billy Whitlaw, Percy Edwards, and Barry Dennen. I'd also be doing the film a great disservice if I didn't mention the beautiful score by Trevor Jones and the amazing design work by Brian Froud.
Let's go to the trailer.
In a place outside time lies a mystical realm of sound and vision. A wondrous civilization. Where good and evil struggle to possess the dark crystal.
So we had discussed doing this movie ages ago.
Yeah.
So much so that I have now watched it 2.5 times. That's how long ago we watched it. Whose shame list was this on?
This was on mine.
Because it's technically on mine as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because, so my interest in history of this movie is, growing up, it's a movie I'd always heard about. It was not shown as much as, say, Labyrinth was. So it was a movie I knew quite a bit about, and then it had a resurgence in high school for me, where I went to school with friends, and we'd be talking about movies and I went to school with friends. I swear I did.
Oh, I did not.
Well, we'd be talking about movies and everything, and I was always a big fan of Labyrinth, and David Bowie was kind of having a resurgence in that time period as well. And then a couple friends I had were like talking about the Dark Crystal and how frightening the Skeksis were. I don't remember if any of them actually said the movie was good or not, but I do remember them talking a lot about it. And I remember visiting my family in Virginia, and I was walking through a pawn shop, and they're selling the DVD of it. So I picked up a copy, and I had a portable DVD player at the time, and I tried to watch it that night on the portable DVD player, and I fell asleep 15 minutes in, and had not gone back to it since. Cut to about a month ago, I started to watch it. I had to rewatch the first 5 minutes with the narration, I want to say 7 times. Because I was, for whatever reason, really struggling to follow this movie and what was being said. For some reason, it's not a complex film, but it was so high concept that I was just struggling to figure out, wait, the crystal cracked, and these two new races formed, and they're somehow using the crystal to survive, and they don't get along. I was struggling with it, but I eventually powered through it, and I remember getting about an hour in, and for being only an hour and a half movie, the movie felt very long for me. Let me preface, I didn't dislike the film. I'm just leading you down my journey. And then I want to say I watched the last 40 minutes of the film, like pretty much when they went to the Skeksis castle, and couldn't tell you a single thing that happened. And then we were supposed to record, and it didn't happen. And then cut to earlier this week, and I was like, I need to rewatch The Dark Crystal. And part of the reason I think I was struggling to follow along is because the voice acting was so abrasive, and it was hard to make out what a lot of people were saying, that it was very easy for it to tune out. So I watched it like a TV show, where I broke it up into half-hour increments and watched it that way. And I finally made it my way through it, and I will say, I think I enjoyed the film for the most part, but I much prefer Labyrinth.
Okay.
So that was my very long... And I feel like this movie's following me, Nick. Because, like I said, I've watched it 2.5 times at this point, and now a local theater called the Times Cinema, they do their Friday Night Freak Show where they're very inconsistent about what they show. They say freak show like it's going to be counterculture or cult or horror films. They're showing the Dark Crystal coming up, and it's like I guess I can see it,
but it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, this movie's following me. It's following me.
Well, it is. It's having another resurgence now with is it miniseries or TV show?
A TV show through Netflix. It looks like it's a prequel.
Yeah.
And I do have to say, even like Dark Crystal is not my favorite of the Henson fare. I respect the out of it because it's just ambitious. But I'll probably even it's called the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. It's a prequel. I'll probably still check it out.
Yeah.
But what'd you think, Nick?
I did not have a dissimilar history with this movie. It doesn't go quite as far back. I hadn't heard about it much when I was growing up. But when Netflix streaming first, I had Netflix back in the send in back your DVDs days. And when it first switched over to streaming in a way that I bought into, that was one of the first ones that I added to my list.
Yeah.
And it kind of sat there. And then I did finally like pop it on, and yeah, about 10 minutes in, like I zonked out. Like, not because I don't think that it was boring or dull or slow to start or anything, but probably a combination of a lot of information right off the bat.
Yeah,
coupled with
because they create a brand new world and these creatures, and you don't have any
Here's everything you need to know.
And apparently, from what I was reading, it actually takes place on another planet, so there's a sci-fi element to it.
But I think the combination of that much information with the kind of warm and fuzzy, Henson world, is a combination that's easy to kind of like lull you into a really great nap.
Yeah.
So it sat there in my queue forever, and when we started talking about this show and our concept for the podcast, this was one of the first ones that I knew I wanted to do. And we didn't tackle it in the first season, and we didn't get to it in the second season, and finally, like, it made it. And I suspect, based on your initial reaction, that I enjoyed it a little more than you did.
It could be. I guess I want to preface that I didn't dislike the film.
Yeah.
I don't think it left the indelible mark on me that Labyrinth did. And I have my theories behind that.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little more about your feelings on it first.
I think if we're approaching this from a Dark Crystal versus Labyrinth approach, Labyrinth got a bit hokey for me at times.
That's fair.
And again, not in a way that I disliked, but I liked how seriously the Dark Crystal took itself.
And that's a fair criticism.
Which clashes a bit with kind of how, is there an uncanny valley with puppets? Like, but those Gelflings, like, they were and the way that they cut between the puppet and then what was like a costumed actor running away.
And like I just kept thinking, it's like, so they'd go from puppets to full-sized people in costumes, and I was like, they must have had so many sets. They had puppet sets, they had sets for people in costumes, they had miniatures. There's like, I could just see the money on the screen.
Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting experiment because most puppet-related media stories are at least a little silly, so that it feels right that it's puppets, right?
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting experiment in that it did take itself completely seriously, and it's not saying like, boy, this story would be really dark and serious if it weren't for the puppets. It just said, all right, we're going to be a serious, dark fantasy movie, and I got into it.
Yeah. I think I've learned about myself over the years is, did you listen to my I had a Vinegar Syndrome review episode a couple weeks ago where I was reviewing a movie called The Uninvited about a cat on a boat. A killer cat on a boat.
Nice.
And I've learned about myself that I don't super get into bottle films, movies that are all set in one place, and I don't super get into movies set on boats. I've also been learning about myself, while I like fantasy, it's not my go-to genre. There's fantasy films I like, and when they hit me in the right way, they're fabulous. But fantasy is not like, it's like if I have the choice between I should have had an example. If I had the choice between Conan the Barbarian versus a movie that's not Conan the Barbarian, I'm probably going to go towards a movie that's not Conan the Barbarian. Not because I necessarily dislike Conan the Barbarian, it's just not my go-to genre. Just like on a slow Sunday morning, I'm not like, let's put on Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I like those movies. I enjoy those movies. And I think two things were going against me on this one. Pardon me. Fantasy is not my go-to genre. Like I said, while I like it, and when it's done well and it works with me, I love it. But it's not my go-to genre, and I just had a hard time connecting to any of the characters. And I don't know if it's because they're puppets. I don't think that's the case, because I've connected to the Muppets in the past.
Right.
I just don't think Jen and the other Gelfling, I can't remember her, Kira?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Kira. I had no connection to them whatsoever. Whereas with Labyrinth, as hokey as it could get, I was completely Sarah's involvement in the film worked for me, which also might tie into, I think fantasy works better for me when it's kind of got the Narnia effect of people in this strange world, so things need to kind of be explained to us a little bit, or the Harry Potter effect where, well, we need to teach you, Harry, about this world a little bit, or you're kind of viewing it from an outsider's perspective. I seem to like that type of fantasy most.
Yeah, no, I actually feel really, as much as I love fantasy, like movies is not the way that I prefer to consume my fantasy fandom.
I think fantasy movies work best when they're, as I was saying, the outsider looking in type perspective. Where movies like Conan the Barbarian or You're the Hunter from the Future work for one reason or another. But I think the risk you run sometimes with high concept fantasy in movie form is it can just be too abrasive and too much. But that's just me.
No, I think you're really onto something. I remember having a conversation with some other movie nerd / filmmakers on the set of an indie film that I was doing behind the scenes for.
Name drop, except you haven't.
I guess that's more humble brag. I'm a really big deal. I'm not. I'm really not. We were talking about the original Star Wars trilogy, 4, 5, and 6, versus the prequels. This was before the more recent ones came out.
The requels.
Yeah, postquels. And kind of the consensus around the table was that the reason why we felt that the prequels really did not live up was because the first trilogy was about a small group of people, right? We were following the stories of some very specific people on their hero's journey, whatever that is. Yeah. Where the prequels were like, let's world build rather than let's have this giant world that these characters are existing in and playing off of. It was trying to, look at how giant this universe is. And it was more about the politics. And you can have politics, but it has to be about the people. It has to be about your characters. And I can totally see that happening with the Labyrinth versus Dark Crystal thing. Labyrinth was about the very few characters where Dark Crystal was, hey, let's bring you into this world and these migrating tribes of species and how the two species fit. It was more world buildy and high concept in that sense.
No, exactly. Dark Crystal felt very much. Whoa! I lost my test. Weird. I don't think I can actually hear my own monitor now.
Okay, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hold on one second.
Doesn't even matter if we record it, Nick, as long as you can hear me.
Yeah. Okay, I can hear myself now. I don't know what I did. But anyways, Dark Crystal is, like you said, very world buildy. It's very plot driven.
Yeah.
But not in the way where the plot's getting in the way of the story. It's just very plot focused. And it's not really even character focused, which I think might be my a little bit of my aversion to it. That's not normally a thing that gets me, but
it did in this case. Yeah.
What was I saying? Dark Crystal is very plot focused and very story focused, whereas for me, and the reason I think Labyrinth worked so much better for me was that Labyrinth is far more emotion focused.
Yeah.
Where you have the arc of Sarah, who's going from being a bratty young teen to trying to save her brother, but then you also have this emotional aspect. It's like, you don't like your family, you don't like him, why are you doing this? Whereas like Jen and Kira were just there.
Yeah,
they had their journey, they had their thing, but it's not like, say, Frodo and Sam in Lord of the Rings, where you feel for these characters and you get to know them. And I just think that's like, I had nothing to grasp onto other than these amazing visuals and puppeteering.
Sure. And yeah, those the Gelflings, like, what did they overcome? Anything? They overcame all these external forces, but how did they evolve? Having gone through this, that is kind of missed. And look, if going back to Labyrinth, once I burp, coffee burp for the working man.
Yeah.
Like, what do we really know about the Labyrinth? What do we really know about the Goblin King's backstory and why he is in this? Like, we don't. You don't need to know any of that stuff. It didn't take away from our enjoyment of the main character's story to not know all of that background stuff. And some people really enjoy world building, and that's fine and dandy, but that doesn't mean that you should abandon the other important things to that character's storytelling.
I completely agree. So I feel like in the long run you did like the film a little bit more than me, but like I said, I want to stress that I didn't dislike the film. It just, I guess I went in with a certain perspective of what I thought it was going to be based on its cult status. Like, you can't see a movie or TV show set in the 80s without seeing a Dark Crystal poster on some kid's wall. And I'm sure seeing this movie at the time in the theater, it was kind of like a mind-blowing thing. I feel like also this is a movie that would affect me more in the theater, because whether we realize it or not, the theater it's hard not to pay attention.
Right.
It's very rare that I've seen a movie that's bored me in the theaters. So I feel like in that right setting, this would have been perfect, as opposed to, on my couch with my dogs walking around and, garbage men outside making a lot of noise. It's a film that demands your attention because it's such a simple story. It's a high concept film, but it's a very simple story of good versus evil, and this young Gelfling who has to go on his journey. It's once again the hero's journey of him having to go repair this crystal. I personally felt like if I was writing this, I would have given a little bit more time between Jen and Kira, just to get to know these characters a little bit better. They did was it brain fasting or something? I don't remember what they called it.
Their Vulcan mind meld.
Yeah, where we got to see a little bit of their past and everything, and then when they went to the Gelfling ruins, we got to see a little bit of what happened to them. Like, we know that the Skeksis are evil, because the opening narration tells us they're malevolent. And that's another thing too. I would have liked to have seen the Chamberlain, like maybe even because like he seemed very fucking desperate.
Yeah.
You know, please come back to the castle, please, 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 please.
It's me,
please.
Mario.
And it's like I would have liked a moment of kind of like I'm gonna keep comparing this to Labyrinth.
It's
kind of like
it's so hard not to.
Kind of like how Hoggle, her little gross friend.
Yeah.
How he had these moments of you don't know if he's helping her or not helping her.
Right.
I would have liked to seen that a little bit out of the Skeksis, but it very much seemed like, okay, they know not to trust him. They're going to keep going on their journey. I guess I just would have liked to seen a couple more layers to some of these characters.
Yeah.
But you know, and like it is such a deep world, and I feel like the TV show they're about to be doing might even fix some of my issues with it, because then they have more time to really expound upon this world, these creatures, and it's not just taking it for face value.
Sure, and decades of absorbing that initial material and seeing what really needs, what gaps need to be filled in.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've kind of talked about our feelings on the story.
Yeah.
I don't have because of my weird way watching this. I don't have notes on any specific scenes, so I figured I just not the way I like to do the episode. But I have the synopsis in front of me from Wikipedia, so I
Okay.
figured we would talk. I would try to pick out things to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about the Mystics.
Okay.
What are your general thoughts on the Mystic? They were fascinating to me because they're kind of like these weirdly cute creatures who are just like very toading and and like they use the old magic, they said, and like I just loved our opening scene of them. We just get to see them making these really elaborate paintings with sand. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And
They're casting rituals.
Jen's been kind of indoctrinated into their world, but I love how quickly they're like, yeah, get the fuck out of here, Jen. Just, you have to do this. We can't. Go do this.
Maybe there was no like prophecy or thing to overcome. They were just like, man, that Delphine is really getting on my nerves. We need to send him on a vision quest. Yeah, that's it. You need to go save her.
I love how vague it was too. It's like, we'll follow the sun until you've come to her. To what was the woman's weird name?
Oh yeah, the
Agra. It's like, just follow the sun until you find Agra. And even he comments on that. He's like, what kind of directions are these?
That's the worst. That was in the database system, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I was getting definite Yoda vibes from that sequence.
I was also getting like Legend of Zelda vibes from it too. It's like, because most of the Legend of Zelda games start off very much like Link doesn't necessarily have a backstory. He's just some kid who gets thrusted into this adventure for whatever reason. It's something sometimes as little as, hey, there's a storm, let me go investigate this too.
It's usually amnesia related.
or even like a family member being like, you must go do this, Link. So like I got some Legend of Zelda vibes from that, especially too because like the first time we meet Jen, he's just sitting there in the nude playing his flute.
His ocarina.
Yeah, and I love too. The first time I was like, when I rewatched it the most recent time, and I was like, is Jen just sitting there in the nude, just playing his weird flute thing? Yep, he is.
And the way you worded that made it suggestive. Boy, they really did go adult with this one.
I'm just taking a bath.
Are you sure this wasn't a vinegar syndrome?
Maybe. They are releasing the Rowdy Roddy Piper movie, Hell Comes to Frogtown.
I had no idea.
There are some frog-looking creatures in this that we can make that
crossover.
You can make that work. Yeah. So we get to meet Jen, and we get a little bit of the Mystics, who are just like these toading old things that just wail. They just wail all the time, which I found really funny. And they send Jen off to... And I imagine Jen's the only thing really protecting them. That's the feeling I got. It's like, you get rid of Jen, what are you guys going to do?
Yeah.
And they just kind of go on their quest.
Well, there's this, like, there's clearly this good and evil duality, right? Like,
Well,
the
it's
fact
very
that
obvious by the end.
they laid that layer on real thick at the end, and it was kind of like you could see it coming. Like, there's only, I forget how many, like, what, 10 mystics, and there's also, totally coincidentally, exactly 10 Skeksis left in the world. I don't know if it was 8 or 12 or what, but there were the exact same amount.
Yep, and then once the Skeksis emperor died, that's when Jim's pseudo father also died.
That vanished at the same time. And
yep, and then like when the Skeksis took injury on his hand, so did one of the mystics. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you guys are doing here.
I really liked that. Even with it being a little heavy-handed, I think it worked in this context.
I agree.
But would have liked them to have played with the theme a bit more. Okay, so they're good and evil, the good and evil side of the same creature split into two different creatures. But that was just kind of it. We're like, yep, okay, they're evil because we said they are, and they're kind of gross looking. Okay, the mystics are good because they're, I guess, kind of nice. Like, I didn't feel like there were any real stakes in the world. And this is weird because I prefaced it with how much I really enjoyed this film, and then all I've done is criticize it.
Well, sometimes we it happens.
Yeah.
I feel like we try not to be too negative. Like we'll criticize, but because really what worked best for me was the general look of it.
Yeah.
And that's really something that's hard to like. We can. It's hard to talk about.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit.
Okay.
One of the things that I noticed right off the bat that had me captivated through the entire thing was how much effort, how much work went into the puppeteering of like background elements.
Yeah.
Of the plants, or they'd do a pan shot across some landscape and there'd be a couple of little puppet creatures that would just hop off. Like there was movement in the atmosphere throughout the entire film.
The entire film felt alive.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. And it's not, like you said, it's not even the principal creatures or things that the actors or the puppets are coming in contact with. I noticed when the weird bug creatures, the Garthams, were like going through the hallways, there was like, whether it be something that puppeteers rolled across the floor or an actual animal, there was like creatures scurrying around, and I was like, oh, that just adds new elements to it, where it didn't feel like these were necessarily sets,
right? Which
I appreciate because everything felt alive and felt real, and I was just fascinated just watching how some of these things moved, is trying to figure out like, oh, is this in reverse, or do they have multiple people within these suits? Because
like those. For lack of a better word, what Landstriders or whatever, that they ended up riding across the desert with their long like stilt legs, and you know the filmmakers and us, I'm sure it was similar for you. You're like, okay, so that appears to be somebody inside of it. Are they just like walking on four stilts? And man, the costuming to hide that and make it feel like it was really cool, but. Then when I'm able to step back from that and get out of the how was that done, you're able to absorb this like great visual they created of them, these little gelflings on these large, strange, imaginative creatures. That was really cool.
Yeah, and I will say it's like the design on the Skeksis is superb.
Yeah.
Like, apparently, from what I read, Jim Henson got the idea for the Skeksis from a Lewis Carroll poem, and he saw crocodiles in elaborate robes, and he just really thought that was a kind of an interesting visual.
Okay.
And, like, one thing that I found really interesting, and that I think Jim Henson's company, especially when they do fantasy, does very well, is they have really unique specific details that I love that they don't necessarily explain, because it's either a character trait or something. Like the fact that the Skeksis didn't use utensils, they had these utensils they attached to their fingers, and that's how they ate. It felt a very like it almost felt like the Skeksis were interesting because they felt very much like there are these creatures that were trying to be prime and proper, but they were still just insane creatures down, like deep down.
The-
They have an idea of what royalty acts like, and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But like you get that idea early on with the Chamberlain and the creature that would become the Emperor, that they run into each other in the hallway and they just start squawking at each other like in a very territorial thing. And it's like just how lavish they are with their food, and it's like, they have plenty of food in front of them, they're begging for more, and it's like, oh, this is how you guys have depleted the reserves of land and everything around you. You guys are just soaking up and killing everything around you. And they have like the trial of stone, where they have to like whoever can make the biggest indentation onto the stone or something.
Right.
That's what I assumed it was.
Yeah.
But like I said, they have these giant. And also, there was one Skeksis that really amused me. That he or she had bad vision, and it had 4 different pairs of glasses going down its nose, and each one I assume was amplifying the glasses in front of it. It's like, oh, that's just a really funny detail.
That the Skeksis parts is actually the one where I really wished I was able to see this in a theater. I feel like there is a lot of detail in those puppets that was because those sets were so dark, and they were a very dark, like literally dark, not mood, but like just dark sets, dark clothes. I think I was on a TV in my living room, not in pitch black. I think I could have picked up a lot more of those details in a theater.
And I will say there is a lot of detail there. Like I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but I have a rather nice TV. It's a 55-inch OLED, and with an OLED television, you get perfect blacks. Because like when say you have the letterbox on the top and bottom, it actually turns the pixels off.
Okay.
So you get this great differentiation on color and darkness. And I did watch the movie in pitch black, and there is a lot of detail that I can definitely see was probably being lost on for some people's TVs and cheaper TVs, which can't handle dark representation as easily or whatnot. But no, it's I felt the same thing. It's like, oh, on a big screen with like I've got surround sound, but like I feel like in that specific situation, like I can't think of a score that's got a more beautiful opening theme than a Dark Crystal.
Okay.
And it's like the music and the way the film looked is like I feel like in the theater at the right age this would have really hit me.
Yeah. What's really interesting that I've realized about myself lately, I absolutely recognize how important sound and soundtrack and scoring are to a film.
Did you not before?
No, I always have, but I don't pick up on it. I don't notice it the way that a lot of other people do. When you say, man, the score for this was so beautiful, I go, oh, yeah, I didn't even notice. Like, it registers as a very, like, it amplifies the, like, again, I know how vital it is and how much that soundtrack and score
and
tells that story, but it's not something that I analyze consciously. I absorb it completely subconsciously.
No, understandable. And I guess some people would argue that not noticing it means it didn't stand out, not in a bad way, but it blended all together.
The editing adage, if they notice your work, then you didn't do it good. Like, you want them to not notice the editing.
Yeah, it's kind of the same concept behind like Martin Scorsese versus Steven Spielberg. Martin Scorsese, when he does a long one take, he wants you to notice it, while Steven Spielberg doesn't.
Look at my one take. Look at my one take.
Yeah. But I've always been a very like, I think that's one thing that makes our commentary on these films very interesting, because me and you come from it from a similar standpoint, but also very different. Where we've talked about before, where you are sometimes a lot more story and theme driven than I am at times, and there's other times where I'm very much aesthetic driven with some things. So like I've always been very sonically inclined, where I pick up on music first and foremost in a lot of ways. And like I've actually said, like this has happened with some titles I've reviewed for the show, where I feel like I've said it before, say something I've gotten from Mill Creek or Vinegar Syndrome, where I was like, the movie wasn't for me, but the music was really good. Where I can usually pick up on that stuff really good. And but audio has always been one of those things that I've wanted to, like, I've had an attachment to without even realizing it. And I think that's why I put so much time and effort into building myself a decent audio setup, is because I want more of it.
Yeah.
I want more of it.
It was an interesting observation, because while far from a professional, like I'm a musician, like I play several instruments and have throughout my life. So like I can carry a tune, I can sing. I have that connection to music in my life, but the way that I consume it is different than many. And maybe it's because in film and story, like, just I'm geared to look for this, and this, and therefore I'm not just geared towards consciously absorbing that.
And one thing I will say, one thing that's always fascinating about my film, not about my film, I didn't make this movie. One thing that's always fascinated me about film, there was a quote when I was in film school, and I'm gonna butcher it because I don't remember who said it or even the exact quote, but it was along the lines of, one of the most fascinating things about film is it's the only art form that uses every other art form to make it work.
Right. Yeah.
And since movies are something that a lot of people take for granted now, because anyone can go out and shoot something on their phone, and it's with YouTube becoming the phenomenon that it has, anyone can put up content. And with how transparent movies are now with how they're made, like you go to a movie at the theater now, there's usually something behind the scenes with some big feature. I think a lot of people take for granted all the work that goes into making a film like this, or any film, and it's no surprise that different people are going to pull out different things. Like I'm even sure with, say, classically trained artists, if two different classically trained artists look at a painting, one person's going to talk about the color representation, someone else will probably talk about the brush strokes.
Sure.
There's so many different elements to it, so it's not surprising that what you say we'll pick up on is not what I'll necessarily pick up on. And I know we've never like had arguments, but we've butt heads in the past about how I'll be really into a film because it just achieves a certain aesthetic about it, and that you're like, well, there wasn't much for me to go.
Right.
And so it's two different ways of thinking. If you want to, though, I've got it queued. I could play you a couple bars of the opening theme if you wanted to hear it.
Sure, yeah.
I had, because of the wonders of YouTube. So this is the opening theme. After the ad. Video will play after ad.
Yeah, okay, I'm kind of remembering that now. It almost has like a Gone with the Wind kind of...
A little bit.
This grand store.
Yeah, and it's like, not to say that a movie about puppets can't be a grand big movie, but it's like it's far more epic than I would have given it credit for.
Yeah.
Especially in this time in the 80s when obviously orchestras were like this. All things considered, this was Jim Henson Company was a big company, but this was kind of still it wasn't being made by a major studio. They were making independently.
Yeah.
It's a big budget independent film, but it's very big. It's very swelling. And actually, I first noticed the music before I had seen the film. Last year for Christmas, my wife Amanda got me the score for Dark Crystal on vinyl, and it actually comes in this very beautiful purple vinyl. So I was listening to the score a lot before I'd seen the movie, and I was like, well, I love the music in this. I'm sure I'll love the movie, and I think I like the score more than anything. I'll be sure to post on the Instagram a picture of the purple vinyl because it's quite beautiful.
Nice.
But the movie had pretty much hooked me from that opening bit of music. So I struggled a little bit in the middle. It's like, why am I watching Jen take a bath as a baby right now? But I think it's a movie that's challenged me so it's a movie that I feel like I want to go back to at a later. I want to give myself some time away from it first because
Yeah.
I've watched it so much over this month. But I feel like it's definitely something I want to go back to.
Cool.
And especially maybe like after I've washed my palate out a little bit with a couple other fantasy films, because I know we still want to do He-Man.
That's right.
And,
Yeah.
I kept mentioning Conan the Barbarian because I've never actually seen Conan the Barbarian.
That's
So
on
it's
my
a movie
shame list also.
So I feel like it's a movie I need to see.
All right.
So, but like I remember, everyone goes through fatigue, and I've got friends in my life who are big horror fans like myself, and I feel like they never watch anything that's not a horror film, and I feel like I would become so fatigued with it after a while.
Yeah.
And same thing happened a couple years ago with the Avengers movies. Avengers 2 pissed me off so bad that I was like, I don't really want to watch another superhero movie for a very long time, and I hadn't for a very long time. I eventually caught myself up so I could see Endgame, and I've once again had fatigue again for that. So I was like, I could go without superheroes for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened with fantasy because Peter Jackson broke my heart so much with those Hobbit movies that I was like, I'm good for a while.
Okay. I recently saw the Hobbit series, like within the last year. I really enjoyed it.
Someone made a super cut where they've cut all three movies into one.
Nice.
And I want to watch that. It's a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
But he told the story of the book and just used the important bits from all three movies and cut out all the filler.
Okay.
So I was like, I kind of want to watch that.
Yeah. Though that and that's interesting because I didn't watch them piecemeal. Like I sat down on a weekend day and watched all three of them back to back.
Jesus Christ.
So that might be,
And the Hobbit movies, we're going to go on a little rant about the Hobbit now for a second. When the first trailer dropped for the first Hobbit movie, I was so in. Because I really liked the Lord of the Rings movies. I haven't revisited those since I saw them originally. But the trailer had really got me. And I relatively liked the first Hobbit movie. I was like, okay, that one was pretty good. I'm looking forward to the next one. And then I just feel like for me, they just kind of got worse.
Spiraled out.
But then one of the few reasons I actually want to buy the Blu-ray for that is apparently there's a special feature on there. It's a behind-the-scenes documentary with Peter Jackson where he's being very candid about the fact that he's making these out of obligation.
Oh, interesting.
And that he is very unhappy making these movies.
Wow.
Because originally Del Toro was supposed to make them, and he dropped out, and they had always sunk a lot of time and effort into trying to develop them, so Peter Jackson's pretty much like, well, fuck it, I guess I have to do it now.
Wow.
And like he'd lost a lot of weight at the time too from stress, and he doesn't, I don't know if he actually says the words, but he essentially alludes to the fact that he's phoning it in.
Wow.
And I was like, this made it on the disc?
Right.
How did that happen? Was no one watching this stuff?
Maybe that was his only, all right, I'll do it. But I'm also putting this interview on the disc.
So, like, that alone intrigued me. And, like, I like to give most things a second try. It usually takes a while because it's usually not my inclination right after I've watched something to watch it again, unless it's something truly special. But things I don't necessarily like, I try to give a second try.
I also love Martin Freeman.
Yeah. What's not to love about him?
He's amazing.
Yeah. So, Nick, we've talked about our general thoughts on the Dark Crystal. I feel we've touched on the Mystics. We touched on the Skeksis. I've touched on my own personal feeling about Jen and Kira.
Yeah.
I feel like they're weird. Their weird creature pet Fizzgig had more personality than they did. I kept thinking she kept saying Biscuit. He's like, did you name your weird mythical creature Biscuit? I really thought she did. I guess I want to talk about, not a lot of information has come up yet about the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. I watched a short little thingy on Netflix has got trailers.
Right.
It's not really a trailer but so much as it's a behind the scenes of them making it.
Okay.
Which they got a lot of the original people back to come back for.
I had heard. I heard spiritually, it's right on the mark.
It's funny that one of the women who was an a puppeteer on it said it's like, oh, like a lot of it's like good thing there's people here that remember how we made that movie because those of us who were around making it don't remember how we made it. But I'm intrigued because it's got a really great cast. So it's got Taron Egerton who from the Kingsman films and he just played Elton John and Rocket Man.
Oh yeah. Which I saw. That was really good.
Which we should talk about before we run out of time. Okay. It's got Anna Taylor-Joy from The Witch. So she's in it.
I did not see that.
Simon Pegg's in it.
Oh.
Keegan-Michael Key's in it. Mark Hamill's in it.
Whoa.
Andy Samberg's in it. Helena Bonham Carter's in it. So it's got quite a cast. It's going to be 10 episodes, so hopefully they'll get a chance to really expound on some of the things. Like, I don't know, like, for considering I didn't love The Dark Crystal, I'm strangely excited for this version of Dark Crystal. Yeah. So that, if anything, should say everything you need to know about the film, where it's fascinating, where even though I didn't respond to it on a deep level like some people do, I still want more of it.
Yeah. Well, it set up a really interesting world.
Exactly.
So while the original film didn't tell a story that you were particularly jazzed about, I think it says that the world was the world that they built was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And if you you have an opportunity to tell a story that does connect with you, and maybe even add enough to make you like the story told in the first one better with the correct, if they incorporate the correct narrative support.
Yeah, and I'm kind of excited for that. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wish they would have done a sequel, prequel, or even just in the same world as Labyrinth, but I feel like this gives them a far more room to work with than Labyrinth would, especially with David Bowie no longer being with us.
Well, and I'm more interested in a prequel for Dark Crystal than I am for Labyrinth, I think, for the same reasons that we've been talking about. Like, Labyrinth feels self-contained.
Yeah.
I don't know that a prequel to that does anything for me.
It probably doesn't. Like, they've expanded upon it in comic books and everything, and that might be the best place for it, with David Bowie no longer being... Because you could cast somewhat a look-alike or something like that, but it won't be the same.
Right. Okay, well, I feel good about that Dark Crystal discussion. You said you wanted to talk a little about Rocket Man.
I do. I loved Rocket... Well, I went into it kind of knowing I was going to, because one, I'm a big Elton John fan.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about that on the show.
Yeah.
Where actually come October, I will be seeing him on his farewell Yellow Brick Road tour.
Yes.
And I'm going to be in tears, I'm sure of it. And then I love the Kingsman movies. And this was, Rocket Man was produced by the director of the Kingsman film.
Okay,
So
I have not seen those yet.
They are the best James Bond knockoffs you'll ever see, but not necessarily in terms of tone or style of James Bond. But I very much feel like Matthew Vaughn he wanted to direct a James Bond film, and they're like, no. So
here's the Kingsman.
You know what? I'm gonna go out and make the most kick-ass version of James Bond I can, because he actually directed Kick, so that was an intentional
joke.
Where it's like it's the most over-the-top version of James Bond you'll ever see, but it's very satisfying.
Yeah.
But no, I really liked Rocket Man. I kind of knew I was going to anyways, like I said, but I had a review for the film. I don't want to misquote myself, so give me 1 second.
I've never had me quoted back to me before.
No. Well, my app keeps logging me out, but
okay.
I guess my general consensus was that seeing Taron Egerton as Elton John singing Rocket Man as he blasts off into the sky and explodes into fireworks is probably my favorite cinematic moment of the year.
Wow. That's awesome. I loved the anecdote that I heard after about how Elton John's husband had to fight hard to leave the I think he called it an orgy scene. I don't know that I'd go that far, but because of how ethereal it all was, but he had fought for that to remain in the film.
That's interesting.
So I guess they were trying to pull it, but
I know they had to pull. Apparently when it played in China, they had to pull any references to homosexuality.
Right.
It's like, so how long is the movie?
So and cut to credits.
They just have the musical numbers and then just cut. And that's another thing I appreciate about it too. It's like it was a musical kind of. like it had musical numbers, but the film wasn't necessarily a musical. Like I don't
Right.
know, I really appreciated the style in which they did that, and with there's being so much blowback from Bohemian Rhapsody. I loved that. It's like this is kind of what I wanted from that movie. And
Okay.
while I did enjoy Bohemian Rhapsody, I get all the complaints behind it, and the director behind that film is not in good favor of people because of his very terrible past.
Okay.
I don't suppose you've heard about any of that.
I've heard that there was disappointment with the film overall, but no, I'm not familiar with the details.
The disappointment from the film was some people thought that the actor who played Freddie Mercury, I can't think of his name at the moment, Rami Malek,
Yep.
that he wasn't a good choice for Freddie Mercury because he's not the same nationality. I can see that perspective,
okay.
but I don't know what nationality Rami Malek is, but I felt like it kind of worked. But the biggest thing is the fact that Bryan Singer has allegedly been assaulting minors.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's the big thing behind it, and apparently there was tumultuous on set and everything. But I was like, I didn't want that to tarnish this movie, and I don't know. I was a huge fan of it. It's probably going to be one of my favorites of the year.
It's reminds me of the AJR song. I've been listening to AJR a lot lately. A song
AJR?
called, yeah.
I don't know them.
I can send you some links.
Yeah, send me some stuff.
They have a song called Role Models, and
Okay.
the main line of the chorus is all my role models are on TV for the wrong reasons, and it's about looking up to people that then you discover might have unsavory things, and then like so another line is can you really love the art if you truly hate the artist? And it's exploring these themes that we've in this era. These conversations should be happening, and we've certainly had some of these conversations. But at what point does the art that the artists create, how much is that affected by the misdeeds of the artist?
No, makes sense.
And there's not a right answer. It's a huge question that I don't think is right or wrong, no matter what side you fall on it. It's tough.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about Rocket Man is I really hope that Elton John legitimately went to a AA meeting in costume.
I would not be the least bit surprised. Well, I can't say.
And here's how excited I was for that movie, because the movie came out at the same time as Godzilla King of Monsters, and Godzilla is one of my favorite film franchises. I just love giant monsters destroying shit.
Kaiju.
Yeah, and we had a night where we can go see a movie, and Amanda's like, "Well, do you want to see Godzilla or do you want to see Rocket Man?" And that was the hardest decision of my night, but I was like, "I want to see Rocket Man." And she goes, "Wow, legitimately surprised by that choice."
I want to see someone larger than life destroying things. So Rocket Man.
John! That should have been their marketing campaign, especially going up against Godzilla. Someone larger than life destroying lives, or something like
I'm
that.
still standing.
Oh my god, their recreation of that music video was fantastic.
Oh, I know, in the credits. Oh,
Yes.
so awesome.
Oh, and then I also appreciated too that they didn't have the songs necessarily in order of when they came out. They used them as more like emotional resonance of like what's going on in his life.
Right.
So yeah, big fan of Rocket Man.
Me too.
You know what's crazy though? Granted, keep in mind inflation. Dark Crystal was made for $25 million. Rocket Man was made for $40. You look at the two, it's like I could just like if you feel like it'd be the other way around but with inflation. And
but inflation's it is.
And then also like people get paid more now.
Yep.
So I think that's our Dark Crystal. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about before we go, Nick.
The next media event that I have on the docket is we're gonna go see another Fathom event, which is how I saw Labyrinth.
Okay.
We're going to see a Doctor Who episode in the theater.
Oh, which Doctor?
Tenet.
Okay, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
That'll be a good time.
I think if I recall correctly, it's like the end of Tenet. I think it's his final
so
episode.
probably like his,
and it's probably a 2-episode arc.
Yeah, I remember that arc. That's a good one. That's a
yeah.
good one.
Yeah.
So that'll be good. That'll be emotional. All right, guys. Thanks again for listening to the Shameless Picture Show. As always, I am Michael Viers.
And I'm Nick Richards.
You can find the show on Instagram at Shameless Picture Show, and I am at Michael_Viers. And you've recently changed yours.
I have. You're welcome.
What is it now?
It is Pacifist Pugilist.
Oh, f*** you. That's no easier.
It's only 2 words. Now, nobody knows how to spell those words.
I'm sure, yeah.
Pacifist Pugilist.
All right.
How great is that name?
It's actually really great. Thanks for listening, guys. As always, we are on Spotify, Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere. If we're not where you want to listen, let us know, and I'll make sure we get there. I've got a couple episodes.
Subscribe, review.
Yep, rate, review, subscribe. We have no new reviews, so I've not read them on the air yet, but we did get some from in previous episodes that I did read out.
Okay.
We have a couple episodes planned coming up, but I think there's gonna be some good stuff coming, and let us know what you thought of our Cannibal Holocaust episode. An episode I was really proud of. I didn't think I'd get 2 hours out of that movie, but I did. All right, have a good one, guys.